Tubeless tyres. Have you drunk in the Kool-Aid? Do you believe the hype about how good they are, or do you hate setting up tubeless tyres? We're going to give you lots of tricks, lots of tips on how to set up your wheels tubeless. Okay, before we get started, we're going to run through all the things you'll need to go tubeless. For your tubeless conversion, you'll need a Tubeless Ready tyre, Tubeless Ready rim, tubeless rim tape, a tubeless valve with a removable valve core, a tubeless sealant, a plastic tyre lever, and a track pump. Hopefully we all know by now that the mountain bike industry and the term standards is, well, there's not very many shared standards. And unfortunately, tyres and rims are in that bracket where there's some variation. With tubeless, you need to make sure that your rim profile is tubeless ready and the tyre is tubeless ready as well. There's a couple of different standards out there already. So there's the UST, which is Universal System Tubeless, which was set up by rim manufacturer and some tyre manufacturers about 20 years ago. And that defined a very specific rim profile and bead profile on the tyre. And originally it was designed to be used without sealant. And it relied on the tyre being airtight. And it was a good system. It's still out there and you can still get UST tyres. You might not need them, but you will need tubeless ready tyres and rims, and that specifically is in relation to the bead and how tight it is and how sort of square the profile is, so how it fits with your tyres. Don't be tempted to use non-tubeless ready tyres or rims because, well, at worst it could pop off and make a really loud bang. I guess at worst in the workshop it could make a really loud bang and you get covered in tyre sealant, which is a bit messy, but not too bad, and definitely not as messy as if the tyre pops off the rim while you're heading down a rocky descent, where if it pops off, well, yeah, your front wheel will stop really, really quickly and it can get very messy very quickly. So make sure you use tubeless ready rims and tubeless ready tyres. Wheels and rim profiles are core to tubeless setup, and originally the UST system defined a really defined rim profile, so it's kind of like the wavy section in the middle and also the kind of the section where the bead bites on the rim edge. It also defined or made lots of brands use really proprietary and unique ways of making the rim bed sealed. Thankfully, lots of brands have moved away from this proprietary, clever tech and I've just gone with simple tape because tape works, it's replaceable and it's customizable, which we'll go into a bit more detail later. Whilst the UST rim systems defined a special bead lock system, lots of brands have started to move to a hookless rim profile. Some of that's to save a little bit of weight, some of it's to make this bead edge here a little bit tougher, but one thing it means is that it's not relying on a hook to hold the bead in place on the tyre, so it means it's essential that you use the correct tyre, so tubeless ready. Don't try and bodge it with a non-tubeless ready, especially on hookless. So rim tape. Without having the sealed bed of lots of UST systems, rim tape is the way forward now for tubeless setups. Lots of brands of wheels have their own proprietary tape. Lots of it's quite similar. I'll say, yeah, electrical tape might look similar, but it's not suitable. It doesn't take the load, because think about when your tyre's under pressure, it's quite a lot of pressure. So yeah, it might be nice to use electrical tape, it doesn't really work. In a pinch, you could use Gorilla Tape. It's quite thick, it's quite bulky, it leaves a bit of a sticky residue, and it's kind of hard to see how many layers you've got. And we'll come on to why you need to see how many layers there are a bit later. But we've got this stuff from PT's. It's nice and elastic, so it goes on quite easily, and key, it's clear, so you can easily see how many layers you've got on the tape. Why, might you ask? Is it important to know why there's multiple layers or not multiple layers? Okay, so now we've moved away from UST and we're using this kind of coverall of tubeless ready. There's subtle variations between the rim manufacturers and the tyre manufacturers and the beads, and it means that sometimes on some rims with some tyre combinations you'll need more than just 1.5 laps or wraps of tape, and you'll need a couple more. So having clear tape means that it's really easy to see, okay, cool, I've got 1.5 or I've got 2 wraps of tape on this rim. And from experience and a little technique, which I'll show you later on, you'll be able to realise, okay, for this rim in particular, I need maybe up to 4 wraps of tape. So having a clear tape, like the PT's is a really good advantage. You might think a valve is a valve, and essentially they are, but there's some subtle features and useful features that are pretty much essential when you're converting to tubeless. So one of them is that you might have a good cone-shaped rubber fitting, so that means that it will fit into the rim bed, and there's a couple of different rims that need unique ones, but most of the time a kind of good cone-shaped one like this will work really well. The other key feature that is pretty much essential is a removable valve core, and it's key because sometimes some tyre setups you'll need to get the maximum airflow in, so you'll have to remove the valve core. Other times it's more for a maintenance thing, so if you take the valve core out, you'll be able to actually check how much sealant you've got in there, which is something you probably need to do a bit more often than you do already. Sealant by their very nature are designed to seal holes, and well, a valve is a hole and it can get air in, so sometimes they can gum up. And again, with a removable valve core, it means you can give it a clean, take it apart, and keep your tubeless setup set up. Tubeless tyres. These are key in a tubeless setup. You might wonder why, in terms of if you've got the sealant and you've got a rim bed that's sealed, why you'd need a special tyre as well. Most of that comes down to the bead. So the beads need to be stronger, they need to be made to a tighter tolerance, so that's why you have to ensure that you're getting the Tubeless Ready or UST standard tyres, and that's because it will interface with the rim correctly and create an airtight seal. And essentially the bead is the key bit of both these systems, and you want it to be really tight because if it's not tight, you can burp air, and if you can burp air, you can lose pressure, and if you lose too much pressure, the tyre could come off the rim. So if you get a Tubeless Ready rim and Tubeless Ready tyre, that's really going to help. One last factor is that if you're running a non-Tubeless Ready tyre, the bead won't be as strong, and that's because it's designed to have a tube inside to help hold it against the rim. So with no tube to pinch flat, it means that you can run much lower pressure, which is great. You get loads more traction in pretty much all conditions. Often it actually rolls quicker too. One thing that you should be mindful of though is that some tyres won't have the right strength carcass or sidewall to be run at really low pressures. So some of the cross-country tyres, which are designed to be super light, need to be run at a slightly higher pressure than you might imagine. However, some of the sort of down-country, enduro and tougher trail tyres often have an insert in the sidewall, and that insert offers a little bit more protection against sort of like sidewall cuts and things like that, but it also stiffens up the carcass. So when you're running low pressures, it means that you're less likely to sort of burp, which is where the bead can creep away from the rim, and it also just offers more support. So when you're in a turn, it'll hold the tyre up a little bit. So if you're riding more aggressively, or you're doing trail centres, or you're riding anything but XC race, look for a tyre with a little bit of a burlier sidewall to help with that lower pressure riding. This stuff's kind of essential for a tubeless setup. All the modern Tubeless Ready systems really do need it, and I'd recommend it for any kind of riding, because essentially if you get a thorn in your tyre in a UST system without any sealant, well, you're still going to get a flat, which is a letdown. So the sealant stays wet. It's got lots of different things. The PT ones has a combination of biofibers inside it and these bioplatelets. So it's kind of nice. A couple of other brands are looking at it too, but PTs are really pushing it, which is nice. And that's thinking about that you need these platelets and you need these things in the tyre to help coagulate around any thorns or any cuts to help seal, much like your blood does and the way it clots. But PTs are actually thinking about what happens when this tyre sealant is out of your tyre and on the trail. So all their stuff is actually biodegradable, so it's not going to leave a messy sealant patch there forever. It is going to degrade. With sealants, pretty much all the brands use similar amounts. So for 29er wheels, it's around 100 millilitres. But all the brands have detailed instructions of how much you need for which tyre sizes you need. So that'll depend on both the diameter and the size of tyre that you're running. A tip I've kind of learned as well is if you're running a new rim, new tyre, especially if you're using a new tyre, and especially if it's a Tubeless Ready versus UST, is actually splash a little bit more in than the brands recommend. And that's, I've found through experience, is that it helps effectively seal the tyre, but then you've still got some actual active sealant sloshing around inside to seal up those holes. If you're living somewhere particularly thorny, or you're going away for a week, again, kind of err on the side of caution and use a little bit more sealant, because some sealant will spurt out as it starts to seal up your tyre, And if you're away for ages and you don't want to take more sealant with you, having a little bit more inside the tyre will mean that you should be flap free. Another advantage of running a tubeless tyre setup is that you can run an insert. An insert, you say, what's he talking about? It's a, well, with Vittoria, it's a green foam ring. And essentially it's a closed cell foam ring that sits inside the tyre carcass. And it just creates a protective barrier between the hard object and your rim. They can be really good. It's much, much easier to set up with a tubeless system than with a tube. And they just provide an extra bit of support for the tyre, and I'd say the key thing is protecting your rim. So if you're riding somewhere particularly rocky, then yeah, I think especially on the rear, they're an essential item to stick in. We've got dedicated videos on how to set them up because there's a couple of different styles out there. But yeah, if you're running tubeless and you like to get rad and gnarly, then run an insert in the rear for peace of mind. Right, time to get messy. Well, actually non-messy with Coutts Create's non-patented, no mess tubeless sealant technique. So yeah, hopefully we won't get messy with this dry approach. Your wheel might come with stock tape. For this example, we've taken the tape off. There's probably nothing wrong with it, but for this technique, we want to highlight how you might need to do a couple of wraps or even triple wraps of tape around the rim to make sure that you get the bead and rim edge interface perfect. And that's how this dry technique works really, really well, is that it sort of flags any inconsistencies with the height of the tape that you need and the subtle differences between the different rims and different tyres that you might use. So we'll begin by wrapping 1.5 reels round. Here's the valve hole just here, and we're going to start taping sort of about a quarter of the way around from that to ensure that we've got at least 2 laps of tape on. So we're going to start it off. Just centerize it, and then you're going to have to use quite a lot of effort to stretch the tape into place so it dives right down. Just be careful to hold at least one end whilst you work around. So in terms of how tight you need to pull it, different tapes have got sort of a different elastic level. So some tapes you can pull on really hard and it'll stretch a tiny bit. Other tapes can't and don't stretch very much at all, so you've just got to be really careful that you're pulling it tight enough that it can seat down into the wheel well. This wheel's quite wide. The rim tape, I probably should have sized up. The rim tapes do come in different thicknesses, and often you'll need to size up on tape so that it fills, because as you pull it, it kind of narrows and stretches a little bit. But what I'm going to ensure is that we've got 1 lap of tape all the way around, and then we're going to do a second that covers this rim edge, and then we'll do a third that covers that edge, just to ensure that the whole of the rim bed is covered with tape. We've gone for 3 layers, so we've essentially got 1 in the centre and then 1 each side. And so we're just going to make a nice, I do it straight. Some people cut the tape at an angle. What I do then is probably not that many people do, and it's a bit nerdy, but I'll basically run my hand and thumb in the central groove and make sure that the tape is seated fully and it's all stuck down. So sometimes you'll hear that's air popping, where I've probably not done the best job ever of putting the tape on, but I'm just going to push out all those air bubbles and make sure that we've got a nice even sort of adhesion to the tape. With different tapes, you might need to use different additional tapes. So with PTs, they've got this nice strip of finishing tape, and that goes over not necessarily the end of the valve, but I found success in it using it over where the valve hole is. So we'll just, again, advantage of the clear tape is that we can see that the valve hole is just here. Other tapes, it is a bit more faffy, so we know where the valve hole is, and we're just going to stick this finishing strip on. Lots of different people have got different techniques for this. PTs uses just a simple spike tool just to poke a hole in the centre. I mean, a quick way of finding the centre is sliding it in from the other side, because then you can kind of feel the fabric coming up, and you just slide the hole in and then make it a little bit bigger so that it's nice and even for when the valve goes in. Insert the valve through the hole that we've made. Might need to wiggle it around a little bit and then just push it in. So with BTs, we've then got a rubber O-ring, and then we've got the locking collar. So we've just got to put the rubber on. That helps sort of protect the rim, and then the locking collar helps pull the valve in. So use a fair bit of force on the inside of the rim side to push the valve down in and make sure that rubber grommet is fully seated into the rim bed. Now, it can be easy to sort of like fall into, especially some of these valves. So the PT's one's got this kind of like cruciform shape on, and that's if you use an insert, you need to have space between the valve and any kind of insert that you run to allow airflow. It's kind of tempting to put maybe a screwdriver or an Allen key in and really hunker down on this lock nut. But effectively, that doesn't really help, and you could damage your rim. You could crack it by forcing it too tightly. So I would say use a good amount of force with your thumb just to make sure that lock nut's tight. The rubber grommet is going to be doing the hard work of the sealing, not that little rubber O-ring. So don't go too bananas. Okay, we've unfolded our tyre. We're going to line it up. I would say do check the direction of your tyre. Lots of tyres are directional. What I do is I put the bead in opposite the valve. That gives us a little bit more room to work with. So with a tyre bead sat in the bottom of the rim, try and then just work the bead in around to finish the last bit of bead going on where the valve is, because it should, he says, famous last words, should give you a little bit more space to fit the tyre on. So with this bit, just be careful. Like sometimes if the bead is really tight, use a tyre lever to make sure that you're lifting the bead over the valve. Here I've got enough space just to lift it over, and yeah, just check that the tyre's nicely in the well, so that's the deepest section in the rim section. With the one bead mounted, often tyre guides and sort of videos on Tubeless will start splashing in pints of sealant and mounting stuff, but with Coutts Create's patented, non-patented, mess-free tubeless, what we're going to do now is just mount the other side of the tyre. You might be saying, oh no, I won't be able to get the sealant in. You will, and it will save you a little bit of mess, and it will save you a little bit of time this way. So again, start from the non-sort of valve side of the rim and just work the tyre onto the bead. So just double check that the bead is mounted all the way around and it's even on both sides, so there's not one bit that's missing. Hopefully it will have been quite tight, not so tight that you've had to break out tyre levers or break tyre levers, but tight enough that the tyre's on there, and hopefully, even with a valve core in, fingers crossed, we'll be able to just pop the tyre on the bead. Okay, it's almost like I planned it not to work that first time. So that was with a valve core in. We're going to do one attempt with a valve core out. So with PTs, one of the valve caps is very handily a valve core removal tool. So we'll just pop it out. So we'll try again one more time. But if again we have a kind of failure and it doesn't inflate after a couple of sort of like really good pushes with a good track pump, don't panic, don't keep pumping and don't keep kind of sweating and swearing. We'll just unmount the tyre. We're going to do another wrap of rim tape, and that will bulk up that gap between the rim bed and the bead so that hopefully it will pop on, but we'll give it one more try with a valve core out and see where we go. We're starting to air up, so it's going well, so we're going to keep going. Super, with the tyre inflated up to 30 psi, we got the slightly scary pops, but those popping or kind of like snapping sounds are quite reassuring. That's just the tyre bead moving up over the little inner lip of the rim bed and popping up against the bead on the rim. We've got two options now. We can let the air out, which is fine, and then we can insert that sealant via the valve itself, so with the valve core removed, of course, or what I prefer to do, because we want to put quite a lot in there, we want to check that we can put a good amount in there and make sure there's loads of the good glittery fibres inside the tyre, is we'll deflate it and then we'll just pop one side of the rim off. What we want to do is spin the tyre around so that gap is sitting at the bottom, and then we need to make like a cocktail and give it a good shake. Check how much you need to use. For PTs at around 100ml for a 650 2.6 tyre, and you can just pour it in. So what I'm going to do is, slowly rotate the tyre around so that sealant sloshes around to the sort of sealed or closed side, and then remount the bead. It's time to pop the pump back on and inflate. Okay, this time we've got sealant in, so we can put the valve core back in. So it's kind of all one swift motion, so I may have to stop talking because I'm not very good at doing two things at once. I'm going to pop the valve off the pump, cover the hole with a finger, and then try and screw the valve core in really quite quickly. Okay, that's your tubeless setup. Hopefully it was painless. In terms of setting it up, sometimes overnight you'll have drops of pressure, and then that's just as the sealant helps seal the inside of the tyre and also helps seal the bead section around here to make sure it's nice and sealed from the air. So sometimes that uses up sealant and sometimes you can have drops in pressure. So don't worry about that, pump it up. I'd say probably the best thing you can do is actually, if you've got the right amount of sealant in there, you've done a really good job with the tape and valve as we've done step by step, actually going for a ride can really help because it opens up the tyre carcass a little bit, allows the sealant to move in and seal any kind of porous sections of carcass, and also especially kind of around the bead of the tyre into the rim. Sometimes certain tyre profiles and bead profiles need a little bit more sealant around there, and just giving it a bit of time can help that. I have seen other people do lots of sort of tapping or whooshing techniques, which in a hurry can work. So just sort of like looping the wheel back round and sort of skidding itself on the ground, just to help move the tyre and sealant around. You can leave it sort of for a couple of hours lying on a bucket, for example, just so that the sealant works into the sidewall really well. Sealant is fantastic and the new stuff now is really brilliant, but what you might need to take with you, in actual fact, I think everybody needs to take it with them with Tubeless, and that's a plug kit. You can get ones with small worms, you can get ones that are kind of built in with CO2 inflators. Essentially, if you've got a thorn that the sealant just can't fix by itself, it needs a bit of help, and these worms can be kind of stabbed into the tyre and then sort of pulled halfway out, so it helps seal the hole, and then the sealant can work and coagulate around it. I think they're just essential if you're starting to use Tubeless more and more. So yeah, if you're going out riding for long rides, don't forget your plug, but if I've missed any tips, put them in the comments below.